Hello, it's Jay. I am checking in with Chapter 1 of Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. It is, was it first published in, I think, the 1993. It's a reread for me of a book that is sort of all about, yeah, understanding comics, and not from the kind of just somebody who's grown up with comics all their life and just like, oh, what's comics? I know what comics are. I read comics. And I mean, Scott McCloud starts off the book saying like, oh, when I was a kid, comics were brightly colored picture stories with silly writing, fantastical stories, and were kind of disposable art. And that he soon became too old at the age of 8 or 10 or 11 and was reading books where you could be really smart, but then a friend got him back into comics, and he was like, oh wow, this is actually something that he then fell in love with and thought, this is a serious thing and I want to become a cartoonist. The first section of this book is called setting the record straight, and it is all the first little bit about it is like, okay, we're going to talk about comics. It's like it's huge and varied, and I mean there's just this beautiful globe picture which has got all various comics on it, including Crazy Cat right beside the Thing, between the Thing and Batman and Popeye and Elastic Man and Charlie Brown and Doonesbury and Zippy the Pinhead and Rcrd, just so varied. And I mean, even that is just a little slice of this. Really, is just a little slice of this globe. So it's like what we need to have a definition that's actually going to encompass all of this. And he starts off by talking about Will Eisner, who wrote a book on the subject called, is it, I don't know if it, okay, but Will Eisner uses the term sequential art when describing comics. And so that taken individually, a picture is merely a picture, but when you have two pictures beside each other, that is when you get that sequential art. Something happens in between the two frames in the gutter, which gives you that sense of motion. There's a fellow with a top hat right there at the thing of with his hand on the brim and then lifting it, and you fill in that motion. But also something like a juxtaposition where you have a gun going off, and then the next panel is a woman screaming. There's a part of your brain constructs that story of that woman is reacting to what happens in the panel before of the gun going off. So where he talks about comics contains writers, artists, trends, genres, styles, subject matters, and themes, but that's not the actual. That is the art form is the medium. That comics is the medium where all of this other stuff gets carried into it. I won't go through the entire stuff, but a sequential. He said says sequential visual art. It's like, well, what about cartoons? What about movies? They are sequential art as well. So what he ends up coming up with for his definition of comics, which he says look, this is just my definition. This is the working definition, which I'm going to do, is that people can disagree with, people will probably refine, I might even change my mind about it, is going to be juxtaposed pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence intended to convey information and or to produce an aesthetic response in the viewer. So it's something that we just, it's to try and open up the idea of what comics are. And I mean, he goes back into history and talks about how long back do comics go? A lot of people only date it to kind of just before the beginning of the 1900s as to when it starts. But he says no, I think using my definition, you can go back to places like the Aztecs, to the Bayeux tapestry, to Egyptian paintings, not the hieroglyphics, which are probably more akin to writing, but to the paintings themselves, where you can see kind of like in this one, the Bayeux tapestry, that it's telling a story, juxtaposed posed pictorial images in a deliberate sequence, which your eye traces over to find. What was there's various other ones. I think there's the Egyptian painting, which apparently, if you it's like it starts there with the harvest and goes all the way up to here, and back again. So that kind of fits his definition of what a comic is. Now, where you get into stuff with a kind of more modern idea is the kind of the printing. You got stuff like Hogarth, Rudolf Topher, who is somebody who I need to look at. Whose light satiric picture stories, starting in the mid 1800s, employed cartooning and panel borders and featured the first interdependent combination of both words and pictures seen in Europe. Not that comics have to have words. They definitely have other examples here of wordless novels by Lynn Ward and Max Ernst, of collage novel, um, as sort of as also examples of comics. So yeah, it's kind of him getting his get setting the record straight to begin with, saying like, okay, this is where I'm coming from when I'm talking about comics. It's interesting, like he looks at something like a single panel cartoon, something like aka maybe like the family, his takeoff of a family circus of like, "Mummy, why ain't I juxtaposed?" Is like it's a single panel. It's not juxtaposed with anything. It's cartooning. It's cartoons, but it's not a comic. Comic is going to be two images getting juxtaposed in the thing. So he would set that aside. Now that said, in this thing here, the kind of the wide open spaces of space, he says that there's no genre, no single genre, there's no single subject matter, and there's no style or no materials that are essential to comics. Comics are just the juxtaposed pictorial or other images. So that can be like photo comics. I've seen those where it's actually pictures, but they're one picture, another picture, another picture. That's using photography. So there's so many different things, and there's no particular tools or materials that are in that. It really opens up what the idea of comics are, and definitely far from comics simply just being an avenue for superheroes, which is what, growing up as a kid, I assumed for probably a good hunk, that it's for superheroes or Archie or Garfield, animate, um, talking animal things, sort of that stuff. It's like, no, it's such a wide field. So I've been watching the KFAB Comics guys, their YouTube channel. It's actually why I picked up Understanding Comics, and they found this first chapter a bit on the groany side of like it's their least favorite chapter. They it's like you have to come up with a definition of comics. To them it feels like, this feels like bunch of college dudes getting together and kind of doing little pissing contests of getting everything completely locked down in some kind of highly intellectual thing. They are practicing cartoonists, so they have a little less that, and they probably also have a deeper knowledge, especially than I do, so they can probably come up with examples, or like, oh, what about this, what about that? And I mean, I guess that's the thing with any definition. It's by definition, it's going to exclude something that's like, that could be comics. Like the whole thing of like a single panel is not a comic. It's cartooning. It's like, okay, yes, you're leaving out the family circus, you're leaving out the Far Side. There's other things that you're, it's like, you know, it's or what about a one of the it's a single image family circus, but it's some kid going, the kid going all the way through the neighborhood and getting into various different adventures. Is like, well, isn't that a multiple images within that image? Does that count? I mean, you can always kind of you can always come up with different things, but I think he's trying to make it as open and expansive as he sees what the potentials of comics might be. So yeah, that's chapter 1, Setting the Record Straight, from Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. I'll leave it there, and we'll check in with chapter 2 probably tomorrow. More videos later.